Welcome to the Friday Men's Breakfast Podcast, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. In this week's lesson from the book of 2 Samuel, Dale South, who serves as the Associate Pastor of Groups at the Williamsburg Community Chapel, takes us through the account of the Ark of the Covenant moving into the city of David in Jerusalem. So grab your Bibles and open them to 2 Samuel chapter 6 and join us as we continue to learn how the life of King David leads us to the life of King Jesus.
David again assembled all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. He and all of his troops set out to bring the Ark of God from Baal Judah. The Ark is called by the name of Yahweh of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. They set the Ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the cart and brought it with the Ark of God from Abinadab's house on the hill. Ahio walked in front of the Ark. David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with all kinds of fir wood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, and sistrums and cymbals. Okay, so as I looked at this passage here, I needed a little bit of a refresher to try to get all the context right of what was actually happening here in 2 Samuel chapter 6. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I found helpful there that we can kind of connect the dots with what's going on here. To recap quickly, in 2 Samuel chapter 5, David was anointed the king over all of Israel, right? He had previously been the king of Judah, the southern province, for just 7 years. And now, through all the things we've been reading about and hearing about the last several weeks, with Abner and the Ishbosheth and the others, we now have all the 12 tribes of Israel united as one nation again under the leadership of King David. And almost immediately after he becomes king, the Lord gave David victory in battle over a number of enemies. David had been headquartered in Hebron, which is south of Jerusalem, as you see on your map. And David and his men then attacked Jerusalem itself, which is what Tim shared with us some last week, to remove the Jebusites who had been controlling Jerusalem. And then David made Jerusalem the new capital. And so that's when and how that happened. And then next thing, 2 Samuel chapter 5 tells us that the Philistines heard about David being anointed as the king of Israel. And so they went to attack him. Back in 1 Samuel 27, King Saul had been trying to kill David. Now, see, we're going back now 2 years, because we went to 1 Samuel, then we went away for a year to Hebrews. Now you're in 2 Samuel, but originally this was all one big book, right? And then it got divided up in the translation times and in the printing times of things, but it was all one at one point. So we need to go back into 1 Samuel, and we're actually going to even look a little bit in the book of Chronicles, which is some paralleling information that fills in some gaps as we're reading the Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles kind of in tandem here. But when Saul had been trying to kill David, do you remember what David did? He fled with 600 of his men, and he went over to the Philistines, and he tried to buddy up a little bit to King Achish, who was one of the lords of the Philistines there. And he said, I'm being pursued by Saul. He wants to kill me. I would rather him not kill me. And so I'd like to join up with you guys and my 600 men here, and we're going to fight on your side. So he pretended really to be on the side of the Philistine king Achish. But all the while, David was secretly going out and demolishing other enemies. And he would tell Achish, yeah, I went here, but really that's not where he went. He went someplace else. And he wiped out absolutely everybody, so nobody would live to tell the story of what he had done. So the Philistines had recognized by this time, now that David was king, They recognized what a warrior David was, and they wanted to attack him early on to try to get rid of him before he got all of his 12 tribes kind of coalesced and together and got his army all in shape. So they came after him quickly, and the Lord gave David and his men victory, over the Philistines. And in 2 Samuel 5, just from last week, verse 21, it says let me see. No, I think I've got to go back to 1 Samuel. I think I've got a wrong passage here. But the Philistines had one time left their idols on the battlefield. And it was there. I guess it was this time. This 2 Samuel 5:21, the Philistines had come up to fight. I've got it straight in my mind now. There's lots of moving parts here this morning. But the Philistines had come up to attack David, and they had their idols, their gods with them because they thought the gods were going to give them, victory over Israel. And when David and his men ended up defeating them, they left their idols there on the battlefield. And then David and his men collect those idols, and they take them and they destroy them. If you look in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 5 and 6, you just might want to make a note of this. It's not on your handout. I don't have all of these verses down. But Deuteronomy says, "But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars, chop down their Asherim, and burn their carved images with fire. For you, Israel, are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." So David was really obeying the Lord's command back from even Deuteronomy to rid the promised land of the foreign gods and idols. But the Philistines didn't go quietly. In 2 Samuel 5:22, we read, "And the Philistines came back up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim." And the Lord again gives David a resounding victory over the Philistines. And so David and his men, they had just defeated the Philistines twice in a row. And whatever gods or idols that the Philistines had left on the battlefield, David and his men had collected and they had destroyed them. So now David assembled an even larger force with men chosen from all over Israel, representing all the 12 tribes. He's doing a nice political leadership thing here of getting everybody from all over the place involved to coalesce the groups together. And they go out to retrieve the Ark of God. Well, what guys, is the Ark of God? Just a little bit of a refresher here. This word ark, if you look at it, comes from, I think, the Latin word arca. And it literally means chest, okay? So it's like a chest. And so you may be thinking, well, what about Noah's Ark? Well, Noah's Ark was like a floating chest. If you look at the big pictures of that thing, it looks almost like a floating box. And so that's why they call that one the Ark. It doesn't look like it should have been able to float almost, right? And so we are told that they're going back to retrieve this ark, this chest of God. And this ark of God here was really literally more of a chest. I have an image of it on the sheet of your handout there. This is not a photo taken, by the Raiders of the Lost Ark when they found it. This is a rendering, okay, just from biblical information of an artist's rendering of what this probably looked like, because no one has really ever seen this thing in the days of photography since then. So now we're told. Why do they have to go back? This had the Ten Commandments, covenants in it. It had Moses' staff, had the bloomed. And why did this ark? Why did they have to go get this ark? I think that's an interesting question to ask. They were going to retrieve it, and we're told that it was kind of at a strange storage house. It was at the house of Abinadab that was situated on top of a hill. Okay, now. If we look at this on the map, you see that on your sheets there, it's kind of in the middle there, where it's Abinadab's house is right there above that bottom square, the bottom central square. Just above that is Beth Shemesh in that area. That's where the house of Abinadab was. It's very, very close to the Philistine border, right? And so there could have been a part in mind that David just wanted to bring the ark back to Jerusalem and to worship and to have Israel's worship established with God as the centerpiece. But there may have also been some real concern on David's part. We've just defeated these Philistines twice. We've taken their idols, we've smashed them, we've collected them, we've burned them. And there sits the ark at Abinadab's house on this hill, just a few miles, of even that, from the border where the Philistines are. What if they want to go now and attack the ark and destroy the ark? And so he wants to get that ark back into Jerusalem for probably a number of reasons. And if you're wondering, thinking, I thought the ark was supposed to be with the tabernacle. I thought the tabernacle was supposed to be in the center of the camp of the Israelites. And if that's the case, then why was the ark of the Lord at the house of Abinadab? Well, I think that's good thinking. You guys are asking good questions. Okay. I like it. We need to go all the way back to answer this question to 1 Samuel chapter 4. Now, Samuel was just a young prophet. He hadn't even begun his ministry in full yet. Saul had not become Israel's king yet. Israel, in fact, didn't even have a king yet. And at this time, the Philistines had defeated the Israelites in battle. And so the elders of the people, because that's who ruled them pretty much, they had a judge, they had some elders, and they said, the Philistines defeated us. We really do need God's help. And so let's take the Ark of the Covenant with us into battle. And so we'll go next time and we'll take our God right there with us. And in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 3, we read about it. It says, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." Now, the Israelites at this point, we don't really see them inquiring of God. Lord, should we go to battle with the Philistines here? They're not asking him what to do, whether they fight or what they shouldn't fight. They simply sort of seem to think that the ark was like a good luck charm, that they needed to take this ark with them if they wanted to beat the Philistines. So the results were disastrous, absolutely disastrous. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers in that battle, and the Philistines captured the ark, or the chest, right, of God. Now, among the dead were the priest Eli and sons Phinehas and Hophni. Now, remember, these guys were bad. The sons were kind of misbehaving priests. They did things they shouldn't have done. God judged them. And so Phinehas, one of the sons' wife, was about 9 months pregnant at the time. She was nearing her full term. And when she heard of her husband's death and the ark's capture, she went into labor and she gave birth to a son. And we recall the name of what that son was? The name was Ichabod. Ichabod. And the name Ichabod means the glory has departed. Okay? The glory has departed. So now the Ark of the Covenant had been taken over to the Philistines, and the Ark of the Covenant really was the manifestation of the glory of Israel's God. And so the Philistines took this ark to they had like five major cities. They took the ark to one of them called Ashdod, and that's on your map there. You can see that's going to be, I think, over near the coast there, about 2 inches up from the bottom of the left corner of the map. And when they went to Ashdod with this ark, soon they realized that the Lord was punishing them with tumors. People all around that city were starting to break out in tumors. Some people were dying, and so they said, hey, let's move this ark to Gath, which was another one of their principal cities. And the same thing happened there. And so the people of Gath didn't want this ark or the covenant, this Israel God, in their city either. So they sent the ark to Ekron. And you can see, if you can put on your readers there, you can map it around there where the arrows go. And you'll see Ekron there. It's getting closer, coming closer back towards Israel now. This is another principal city. And here the people decided, People are breaking out in tumors. People are dying. We need to get rid of this sucker before it kills everybody. And so they actually sent the ark. They decided it's best to send the ark away before it killed them. Now, do you recall how the Philistines tried to send the ark back to Israel, right? Well, they built a cart and they put the ark on top of the cart, and then one of their leaders says, hey guys, you shouldn't send this thing back empty-handed. You know, we don't want them to be upset. So what kind of have a guilt offering can we send back with this ark so it'll be more receptive to their God? Well, he keeps putting tumors on our people. Let's send back some tumors. Okay, so they came up with 5 golden tumors, and they put these tumors in a box beside the ark and another little chest, and they said, let's add to the mix. Let's give him 5 golden mice too. Maybe he'll like the mice. And so they put those in the chest and put them there on the ark, and they put it in a cart, and they put 2 milk cows there and put them in a yoke and a harness. And they actually wanted to see, is this a coincidence that all this mess is happening to us with the tumors and the people dying? Or is this really this ark and the God of Israel putting a judgment on us? And so they took the mothers, the cows, they took their babies, their calves that would have been milking from them, and they pulled them aside, put them in another place, and they just said, okay, mama cows, go for it. And they wanted to see, will they go to the side where their calves are to go to feed their calves and unload their milk? Or will they go toward Israel? And sure enough, they went toward Israel. They didn't even mess with their calves. They went on almost a straight line toward Israel. And when they got there to crossing the border, they went to Beth Shemesh, which was Israeli territory. And there's some people out there working in the fields in Beth Shemesh, and they saw the cart with the ark, and they immediately called the Levites. Now, the Levites were part of the Aaronic priesthood clan that helped with all the duties of the temple. And so they said, this is the ark of God coming back. We need to get some Levites involved here because they're the only ones who know how to do it and the only ones who were called by God to do it. So they called in the Levites, and they safely removed the ark, and they chopped up the cart that had come on, and they used that cart to make a big fire and a burnt offering in worship to the Lord. However, in the process of that, some of the men of Beth Shemesh looked at the ark of the Lord. And in the middle of the time, even while they were worshiping there and rejoicing that the ark of God had come back to Israel, the Lord struck 70 of those men down dead right there on the spot because they had looked at the ark. Now, you may be thinking that sounds a little harsh. But 1 Samuel 6:20, David now is, not David, this is way back earlier on, said, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And they called for men of Kiriath Jearim, this Jewish city, who took the ark to the house of Abinadab, which was a closer place to the border there. They got it off that cart, worshiped, carried it on the poles, and went up to this house of Abinadab. He was a Levite. Now we can start to connect some dots, because this answers our question is, how did that ark get to the house of Abinadab on a hill in the first place? Okay, so one question is answered. This tells us how the ark got to Abinadab's house, but there's a follow-up question that we probably need to ask as well. And that is, how long was it there? That's a good question, guys. The scripture tells us, that the ark was there at Abinadab's house, if we do the math, for probably right at 20 years. Yeah, does that sound right to you? 20 years. Does another follow-up question come to anybody's mind? Why in the world did Saul and the Levites and the Israelites collectively allow that ark to sit there on the land of Abinadab's house on the hill for 20 years? Good question. 1 Chronicles 13, 1-3, we read, again, this ancillary fill-in information or some more details. David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds and with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as to the priests and the Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. And then let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. Okay, all of Saul's kingship, they didn't even seek out the ark. And so all the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of the people. Now, in 2 Samuel 6, this large constituency from all over Israel, 30,000 people, the same amount actually who died on the battlefield that one day, they went up to the house of Abinadab on the hill to retrieve the ark of God. And now where Ichabod, remember, the daughter of, the wife of Phinehas who gave birth, it said the glory has departed. Ichabod represented that the glory has departed when the ark left. Now David is going to come to represent the glory of God is returning as we bring the ark back. Now Abinadab and his sons, Uzzah and Ahio, were descendants of Levi. They were all Levites, and they set the ark now on a brand new cart built especially for this, to wheel it down to Jerusalem where it would become the center of Israel's communal worship. Now, when have we ever seen the ark of God placed on a cart? Not too long ago, right? 20 years back, right? And who did it? The Philistines did it. The Philistines put the ark on a cart. Now, when the pagan Philistines sent it away after their miserable 7 months of plagues and death were inflicted upon them while the ark was in their possession, they put it on a cart because they did not know better. Okay? Israel should have known better. That was not the way God had instructed them to carry this ark representing his presence from one place to another. We go back to the verses on your handout there from Numbers chapter 4. Look at 14, 15, then 18 to 20, and it says, God is instructing to Moses about this ark, and he says, and they shall put on it all the utensils of the altar which are used for the service there, the fire pans, the forks, the shovels, the basins, all the utensils of the altar. They shall spread it out over a covering of goat skin, and shall put it in its poles. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp sets out, after the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these. Kohath's sons were a subset of the Levites, okay, a subset of the Aaronic lineage there. They were the ones that were going to be specialists in carrying the tabernacle and the ark on poles. And when Aaron and his sons have finished, sons of Kohath, but they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. Let not the tribe of the clans of the Kohathites be destroyed from among the Israelites, or from among the Levites, but deal thus with them, that they may live and not die when they come near to the most holy things. Aaron and his sons shall go in and appoint them each to his task and its burden. But they shall not go in to look on the holy things, even for a moment, lest they die. Now, see, the Lord had given very clear and specific warnings that touching the ark and looking on the holy things of the ark were going to result in death. Now, maybe over 20-something years, when the ark had been kind of placed in storage up here on mothballs on this hill on the house of Abinadab, maybe the people forgot that. It's not hard to forget things when you're away from it. You put it out of mind for a while. But to avoid touching the ark, the Lord specifically designed it to be carried on poles inserted through rings. And you can see that on your little image there. The sons of Kohath, you needed at least 4 of them, one at each corner, probably to carry this ark. You might have even had more, but you needed at least one at each corner. And so as we're looking here at the retrieval of the ark, things started out very worshipful. We see the constituency of 30,000 people. They were celebrating with music and all kinds of musical instruments, and they were dancing and they were shouting. And there's this great sense of worship. Now, in a very interesting way to me, there's a sense in which this scene kind of parallels a huge mistake that Saul made early on in his kingship. You may recall how Saul was supposed to wait for Samuel, the priest and prophet, to come after a sacrifice that God had given the Israelites a victory on the battlefield, and they were going to sacrifice to the Lord. But he was supposed to wait for Samuel because Saul was not a priest. He was not supposed to offer the sacrifice. And Samuel got a little delayed, so Saul got in a hurry and anxious, and he did it. So Saul also was supposed to have annihilated all the Amalekites, and he was supposed to have taken out all the animals. But Saul decided, no, I think I'm going to save some of those animals, the best ones, to offer as sacrifices to the Lord, although the Lord had commanded him to kill them all. You can read about that back in 1 Samuel 13, 14, 15, if you want to go back to refresh your minds on that one. But those acts of disobedience caused the Lord to reject Saul as the king. And in 1 Samuel 16, 22, there's a verse that's worth memorizing. And it says, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Okay, he's saying here, I don't really want your religiosity here. I want you to listen to what I have to tell you, and I want you to obey me. It doesn't matter how many sacrifices you offer, how many tambourines you tap, how high you jump when you dance, and how loud when you shout and scream in worship. If you're not going to obey me, I don't really want your sacrifices. And so here we are now, more than 20 years later, and instead of at least 4 Kohathites at each corner of the ark, carrying the ark on poles, we find 2 Levites driving a cart down a hill. What could go wrong? Let's read 2 Samuel 6, 5 to 16. Or 6 to 16, we'll pick up. So when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. Then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the ark of God. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, so he named that place an outburst against Uzzah, as it is today. David feared the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? So he was not willing to move the ark of the Lord to the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in his house 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. And it was reported to King David, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and had the ark of God brought up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David, which is Jerusalem, with great rejoicing. And when those carrying the ark of the Lord advanced 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. He and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of the ram's horn. And as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter Michal, who looked down from the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent David had set up for it. And then David offered burnt offerings, fellowship offerings in the Lord's presence. And when David had finished offering the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh of hosts. And then he distributed a loaf of bread, a date cake, a raisin cake to each one in the entire Israelite community, both men and women. Then all the people left, each to his own home. And when David returned home to bless the household, Saul's daughter Michal came out to meet him. How the king of Israel honored himself today, she said. He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects like a vulgar person would expose himself. And David replied to Michal, I was dancing before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord, and I will humble myself even more and humiliate myself. I will be honored by the slave girls you spoke about. And Saul's daughter, Michal, had no child to the day of her death. So, everyone was now in full-blown worship as they were getting this cart back with the ark, heading down the hill from Abinadab's house. The oxen stumbled a little bit. The cart started to shift. Uzzah reaches out his hand to steady the ark and keep it from falling off the cart. Now, at this time, most of us American guys in our situation today are going to think, this is when we might expect a voice to boom out from heaven saying, thank you, Uzzah, good catch. You saved me from hitting the ground. Way to go, buddy. But instead, verse 7 tells us, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah. And God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there because the ark of God, beside the ark of God. See, in the very middle of worship, Uzzah drops dead right there beside the ark, and we see that God was angry with him. Now, one author has said, what would make anyone think that their hand was cleaner than the ground that God created? See, that their hand would be more holy than the ground that God had created. See, the intention was good. I mean, he was trying to do what he thought would be protecting the ark to save it. It wasn't even really an act of thinking rebellion. It was more of a reflex. But God was going to demonstrate his holiness. And if he was going to be coming back into the center of Israel's worshiping community, they needed to know that he was a holy God and that he kept his word. And when he said, if you touch this and if you look inside of this, you're going to die, that he needed to keep his word on that. So God was angry because Uzzah touched the cart. God wasn't the only one who was angry, though, was he? David was angry. David wasn't angry with the people who put the ark on the cart for some reason. David was angry with Uzzah. It wasn't angry with Uzzah for touching the ark. David was angry, it says in verse 8, David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. So in addition to being angry with the Lord, now we see that David is also afraid of the Lord. David was afraid to take the ark back to Jerusalem, saying, how can I ever take this thing back with me and have it close to me and my family? So David was acting now kind of like the Philistines again, who shuffled the ark around for fear of God's anger from one city to the next city to the next city. And then finally they sent it back to Israel. He kept taking it from one house of a Levite to another house of a Levite because he didn't want to inadvertently rile God up. And so David had the ark dropped off at Obed-Edom's house, who was also a Levite. And the ark stayed there for about 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all of his household. And David is kind of using Obed-Edom here as a sort of a canary in a coal mine. When David learned that the ark of the Lord had blessed Obed-Edom's household, he interpreted, it's because of the ark of the Lord was there, this guy got blessed. So he says, I'm going to take that puppy back. So they went back again to retrieve the ark to Jerusalem, and this time David, as they went back, they did as the Lord had instructed. They used the poles instead of a cart. In fact, they took 6 steps, and some of the scholars believe that this was very symbolic here in talking about more like a Sabbath, okay? So they took 6 steps and they stopped and they offered a sacrifice to God, both a bull and a calf. And they were sort of consecrating this entire journey of about 10 miles that they would be carrying the thing on their shoulders on the poles with the 30,000 people marching back up to Jerusalem. And David now had also put on an ephod. Now this is a whole topic for another day. But the ephod was clothing normally reserved for priests. Now what's David doing with a priest's garment on here? Why is it talk about even David maybe offering some sacrifices here? Was David just saying to the Levites, you guys go do the sacrifices? That's one possibility. Or was David actually offering the sacrifices himself? Which is still a possibility with the Hebrew grammar is what we're talking about here. It's not super clear. But from another passage in the scripture, there's some indication there that David is paralleled, even though he is not a Levite, that he gets paralleled with this guy Melchizedek that we talked a lot about in Hebrews. So that David becomes this king of Salem, of Jerusalem here, where he'd have this role of kind of prophet, priest, and king, kind of like Melchizedek, who was before the Levites were ever instituted as the priesthood. And if that's the case, then David would have been fully in his rights to be wearing this ephod. And it seems, because if God's going to get you for touching the ark or looking at the ark, I think he's not going to let this king kind of usurp a priest's authority with an ephod and start offering sacrifices unless it's okay. And I think with David's anger and David's fear of the Lord, he probably wouldn't have done any of that unless it was clearly thought to be okay, because he did not want to die. We just don't know for sure whether David did it himself or whether he ordered some of the Levites to do it. But David's use of the ephod suggests that he possessed the credentials of a priest. And how David attained sacerdotal status is not described in the Bible, but the acquisition of priestly status in the order of Melchizedek by the Davidic family line is hinted at in Psalm 110:4. That comes from from Robert Bergen in his commentary on 1st and 2nd Samuel. So another little interesting point here is that there were women among these people. Women among the people who had gone among that 30,000 there. Women were not excluded from the celebration of bringing the ark back home. But for whatever reason, David's wife, Michal, was not part of the group. She chose not to go. And here come the guys in town. She watched from a window as David and the crowd came back, seeing David dance and worship in this ephod. And in 2 Samuel 6:16, it reveals she despised him in her heart. Now, she was accusing him basically of being vulgar, of being immoral under the guise of worship, saying that he embarrassed himself, flaunting himself before these young women who were there, and by extension, he embarrassed her. Now, what we know of the ephod is it is a very priestly garment, and it has special underwear that you wear. David was not revealing anything here. Her accusation was not right. The priests always had to make sure they were covering up their nudity and to not be uncovered in an inappropriate way. So as a result, we just see that Michal never gave birth to a child. I'd like to wrestle just for a few minutes here with God's harsh punishment of those 70 men for looking at the ark and God killing Uzzah when he reached out to steady the ark. Again, it seems like it was more of a reflex than a rebellion on Uzzah's part. But for God to strike these men dead, it kind of goes against most of our sense of fairness and justice. When you guys read this for the first time, did you ever kind of shake your head and do a double take? Why would God do that? Okay, I think that's kind of a normal response for most of us. If you look at the handout on the back, I think one of the things is we look a little bit about, we've got this sense that the punishment should be proportionate to the crime or to the sin in this case. And that's what we call justice. When we think that there's been an offense that's been committed, we want there to be some sort of retribution, some sort of punishment, some sort of cost or consequence to the negative behavior. But we think that consequence needs to be commensurate with the crime itself. That's kind of how we feel justice is. Does that ring true to you guys? But now, when the punishment is smaller than the crime deserves, one way that could be is just mercy, that the person is being shown mercy. And another thing it can be is corruption. Okay, it can go either way when somebody gets off the hook too easily. But a merciful sentence does not fulfill justice. And so sometimes we see somebody getting off the hook very easily. We say that's an injustice. It doesn't feel like justice. R.C. Sproul says, we may see non-justice in God, which is his mercy, but we never see injustice in God. Okay, and you and I should thank God profusely for non-justice, okay, for his mercy. Now, when the punishment is greater than the crime deserves, we call that cruelty. We say that would be cruel and unusual punishment. I don't have my watch here, Hunter. How far am I going? Okay, I better hurry. Any case, we would say that would be cruelty if the punishment outweighs the crime. And let's see. When we see God killed those 70 men for looking at the ark, and then God killed Uzzah for touching the ark, we tend to view God's response as disproportionate to the crime. I think that's why we do the double take when we first read it. We said, this seems like a small offense for such a big consequence. So to our sense of fairness, it seems more like cruelty than justice. But in reality, God simply did exactly what he said he was going to do back in Numbers chapter 4. They must not touch the ark lest they die. They must not look into the things of holiness, even for a moment, lest they die. Now, you see the big idea at the top of your handout this morning. When we think God's punishment is too harsh for the sin, we underestimate the severity of the sin. Okay. So whatever sin we think is worse than violating God's holiness, you name it, whether it's murder, theft, sexual sin, whatever sin you think is worse than touching that ark or looking inside of it, that indicates that we do not understand the magnitude of God's holiness. God is holier than we can ever imagine. And when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments to Moses, he taught the people that he was unapproachable to sinful humans. He came in fire, he came in smoke, he came in quaking territory. And he told the people, said, stay away, because if you start to go up that mountain, you're going to die. And when Moses asked to see the Lord, he said, Lord, just let me see you. God allowed him to stand in the cleft of a rock, and he allowed him to see his backside only as the Lord passed by. You see, in their unholy condition, he warned the Levites and the priests against touching or looking into his holiness. In their unholy condition, even God's chosen people were not allowed to touch him or to see him. He was unapproachably holy. And God did not choose the Israelites because they were holy and other nations were wicked. The Israelites were pretty wicked too. God chose the Israelites to make them holy. And guys, there's a clear reference to you and me there, right? God did not choose you and me because we were holy. We were wicked. And some of us, we still struggle with wickedness. But he chose us to make us holy. The pattern continued with God separating the people from his holiness until the birth of Jesus. And then something miraculous happens here, something just totally unheard of. In Jesus, the unapproachable, unseeable, untouchable God revealed himself. He did it in such a way that toward the last night of his life, Jesus says to one of his disciples, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. I have made him seeable. And Jesus was embodying all the holiness of God. This God who was untouchable in the Old Testament, now in Jesus becomes touchable. And Jesus repeatedly touched people that no one else would touch. Lepers and the demon-possessed, to heal them and set them free from Satan's bondage. And when Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross at Calvary to take our deserved punishment, the consequences for us not recognizing God's holiness, he satisfied God's judgment. He satisfied God's justice. And the punishment that he received was proportionate to our sins and our crimes. It was certainly not proportionate to his because he had none. Yet, we were let off the hook with a full pardon. See, and this is the case where a merciful sentence does not fulfill justice. We may see non-justice in God, but we never see injustice in God. Because of his mercy, because of his grace, we receive non-justice. It was not injustice because the penalty for the sins was indeed paid. It just wasn't paid by you and me. Justice was served on the cross. It is amazing grace. There is a danger, though, with amazing grace. And that is that we can become so darn accustomed to receiving amazing grace that it ceases to be amazing. We start to think that somehow we deserve it. See, deserving God's grace and mercy is a non sequitur. We think when God allows bad things rather than getting the good grace from that somehow he's being unjust. But by definition, grace and mercy are gifts. They're not deserved. In 2 Samuel 6, 1-23, King David points us ahead to King Jesus. The holiness of this unapproachable, invisible, untouchable God becomes approachable, invisible, and touchable in love. He came to us. Guys, they let that ark sit on the hillside at Abinadab's house for 20 years, just almost forgotten, put on storage. I don't want any of us here to put God in storage because we're angry with him, or because maybe we're afraid of him. We're just not sure what to do with him. We don't like it when he gives us justice instead of mercy. This morning, my prayer is that if there's a sin or a crime that you feel is so small and God's punishment is so harsh, that you would re-look and re-examine your understanding of that sin, because you're underestimating the gravity and the severity of that sin.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you will join us for the next episode of our study of 2 Samuel. Until then, our prayer is that you will grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ, the Savior and the King.